Hello and welcome to the Undercut podcast. I'm one of your hosts, Thiemo Daily, and we are back to review, analyse, and do a bit of a deep dive into all of the action from the Formula 2 2024 season so far. And my, oh my, we've been treated some jolly good racing already this year, as well as just a plethora of other talking points that all three of us are very keen to get into because it's not just me here. I'm joined once again, and as usual, by my trusty co-host. First of all, Mr. Jesse Billington, how are you?
I'm doing very well. If at some point you feel like I'm dropping off, just bear in mind that I've had 4 days of being pretty much flat out. I spent Friday collecting an engines. That was a cannonball from Bedfordshire to Cornwall and back. Stopped off at Bicester overnight. Saturday I was rallying. Sunday I was doing a bike rally, and then Monday I drove up to Elvington to watch my friend try and do 200 miles an hour in a 1935 Riley. Unsuccessful, but quite fun. So yeah, I've been sort of getting up at 5:30 most mornings for the past 4 days and not getting a lot of sleep besides. But I'm here ready to talk Formula 2. I've survived all of the adventures and just sort of ready to get on with the week, and hopefully I'll sleep when the weekend arrives.
That all sounds voluntary and pretty much your own fault, so I'll have no sympathy for you. We're also joined by a friend of the podcast, Inside F2 host, Miss Jenny Craig. How are you doing?
I'm very good, thank you. Very looking forward to Barcelona.
Yeah, we thought we'd try and sneak this in before too much more Formula 2 happened and we'd be absolutely snowballed with all the action, which we already kind of are anyway. So you kind of perfectly open up my segue here because I'll stick with you, Jenny. Your initial thoughts on the season so far, I was saying just before we started recording that it felt longer than F1, but in a good way.
Yeah, so much has gone on, and I think a lot of what's happened, it wasn't very predictable, which has been a nice surprise. I don't think anyone thought that Hadjar and Aaron would be leading the season at this point, but they are.
No.
And I think it's been a massive surprise to see people like Behrman and Martin so far in the standings, but it's been really, really entertaining.
Oh yeah, entertaining is definitely the word for it. And yeah, throw to you, Jesse. I think that's the one word we can definitely all agree on. We might disagree quite a bit for the rest of the podcast, but entertaining it has been for sure.
Yes, it has been, yeah, quite something for an F2 season. It's sort of been almost the season we'd hoped we'd have had from Formula One, with all the teams getting a bit closer together. Instead, we've seen sort of a multitude of different race winners in sprints and features, and then sort of qualifying performances that have blown people away, drivers having a little dabble in Formula One as well, which has been just as interesting. So, yeah, it's been sort of an F2 season for the books so far, I'd say.
Kick things off with Bahrain though, because the drama pretty much started straight away in the first qualifying session of the year. Because talking about that surprises happening, Kushmini took pole on track and was resplendent. It's that gorgeous livery that the Invicta team has, and then it couldn't even last for 5 minutes in the grand scheme of things because he was disqualified because of the height left under tray front external streak, which is easy for me to say on his car being below the minimum requirement and therefore against technical regulations, and just such a pain in the arse way of starting a season from a fan perspective because you think really how much is that going to give anyone an advantage, but rules are rules and it's still frustrating. But Bortoletto, at least being his teammate, got pole position, and you just kind of you're saying it's been entertaining. This is kind of the chaotic nature of it from the start, Jenny, that you were saying we couldn't even get through qualifying without it starting to get a bit mental.
Yeah, I don't think anyone really expected Miney to be up there. He didn't have the best season last year, but I think a lot of that was the Campos wasn't that quick. So it was good to see him up there, and obviously the Invicta was really, really fast in Bahrain. So yeah, just unexpected.
But then talking about his favourite Jesse, Zane Maloney basically just did the double then for the rest of the weekend in the sprint race and the feature race because he just just absolutely superb drive with some excellent overtakes across both races and just absolutely superb from start to finish, and no notes really on him other than that was just out of nowhere. There's this calm, collected drive from him that we're not really used to seeing in F2 because we're so used to the chaos.
Yeah, I think interestingly, we sort of came into the season knowing who Zane Maloney was. He was everyone's favorite Barbadian
Hmm.
boy, as we love the line. But I don't think anyone really anticipated him coming in with such a strong performance, and has sort of for the large part, retained that level of sort of performance and driver ability on track. So this was a great sort of opening gambit for his season. And you sort of look at the chaos that formed around him and the fact that it was just sort of a very wise head on quite young shoulders. He's a very solid pick for, is it? I can't remember who he's a junior driver for. Is it Andretti?
Sauber.
In Formula E, yes, but
Yes,
then Sauber in
Sauber
Formula
in
One.
Formula One. Yeah, that was it. So I've seen a picture of him with one of the Andretti higher ups
Mm.
at a recent IndyCar event as well.
And
So
if my memory serves me as well, he's, well, again, jumping the gun slightly because he's not won the F2 title yet, but I'm pretty sure winning the first two rounds and then kind of sliding under the radar was what Bortoletto did in F3 last year. And so it's just kind of, well, that's a good method. I might try that and see if it works for myself. And he's been pretty consistent since then on the whole. He's not doing necessarily exceptionally well, but he's not doing terribly either. He's just kind of clocking in, clocking out, and he's quite easy to forget about when we're dealing with people like Hadjar and Aaron at the front. But the rest of the racing for Bahrain was pretty good, and like you say earlier, it kind of threw some upsets in there, some unexpected ones in there. I mean, you look at Prama's race in Bahrain, absolutely awful considering what we were expecting from them because, well, they're Prema. You look at Victor Martins as well, Jenny, you were saying, I mean, he's going to be a sorry tale for this whole podcast. I feel like, unfortunately, it's not going his way so far. And what a recovery drive that's going to be if he can find some way to recover from any of this season. But Crawford getting on the podium straight away, that was quite nice to see. Marty as well, straight off the bat there. Then him going and finishing P2 in the feature race. Paul Aron coming back in there because I think it was between last season and this that Mercedes decided to part ways with him. So it was quite a strong way for him to start up his 2024 season. And then Miney having a bit of a point to prove as well and having to start at the back of the grid for both races then because of the disqualification and qualifying, gaining 15 places in the feature race. Not a bad way to kind of quieten your doubts a bit because you said he had a weak season last year, but I think it was still better than a lot of people were expecting considering where he finished in F3 the year before, I want to say. Or is this his first? No, it's his second season now, isn't
yeah,
it? I kind of it blurs together at some point, doesn't it?
yeah.
And then Josh Dirksen coming in P11 in the feature race just behind Antonelli with some kind of amusing foreshadowing for how that whole narrative unfolds for the rest of the season so far. So just everything we kind of took into the season as to what we kind of maybe would expect, Jesse, didn't happen.
Yeah, there was sort of a lot of blind surprises coming into this one. I think the Miney point is an interesting one. We very much sort of underrated him when he arrived in Formula 2 last season. And this season, he sort of very much continued the surprise and stepped it up a bit as well, which is great. He sort of continued that performance and then some, which was nice to see. It's great to see that driver development. It means there's teams and sort of personnel behind and supporting drivers. It's there's always that iconic video from, I think it must have been a Formula 2 race at Silverstone many years ago of one of the drivers bemoaning the fact the team never supports him, pretty much crying on the radio. But there's been a bit of a shift in Formula 2 since then. It's become a bit more supportive and but stayed just as cutthroat at the same time, which is quite an interesting balance they've been able to strike. But yeah, I think Bahrain was definitely a good opener, and we sort of had some interesting storylines sort of initiate at this point. I think it was sort of too early in Bahrain period at least to start judging
Hmm.
things, but working forwards, so if you can look back at it and go,
It's interesting
oh,
what you notice.
yeah, you sort of look back at it and you can see the plot lines starting to come together. And certainly Dirksen as well coming in as a bit of a sort of a pleasant surprise, sort of coming in higher end of the field. No points, but just an interesting drive. But yeah, certainly the recovery drives for Miney and Miata all the way through, really, really good. And I'm still waiting to see a bit more from Miata, to be honest. He's a driver that I
Yeah,
had high hopes for coming into it, given how we see some F2 drivers go to Super Formula. I was wondering whether or not this works the other way round, but maybe
not yet.
Miata wasn't the right driver for it. Maybe it was the wrong point in his career. I'm just waiting to see that little spark that I'm anticipating. Or he sort of does a terrible chair, does a few races in the season, then just sort of buggers off to IndyCar. Speaking of, they just announced that Nolan Sagal is joining
Yes.
Arrow McLaren
Aaron
literally
McLaren
4 minutes
in
ago.
favour of Porsche.
Mm.
So that's going to be interesting. We'll get to that later. But yeah, Jenny, the storylines of Bahrain, there are plenty of them. Which one of these kind of stood out to you the most, or was there something else that caught your eye that maybe looking back over the season so far is more important than perhaps we realised at the time?
I remember when I was watching Bahrain and the way that Maloney drove was surprised me at first, but then I remembered back to the F3 season where there was Behrman, Martin, Hadjar, and Maloney, and how close all four of them were. And what a treat that was to watch, by the way. I loved that
Oh
season.
yeah.
But I feel like a lot of us were very guilty to sort of forget Hadjar and Maloney in that and focus more on the other two because of maybe their stronger F1 links. The other two have sort of been more forgotten in their academies, but I thought it's his way of saying, I am here. I might not have won a race last year, but I'm still in it, and saying to Red Bull that they've probably made a mistake in dropping him now that they're looking for potentially a driver at AlphaTauri.
Yeah, it's always it's fun whenever a team does drop a driver like that and then they immediately go out and make a statement of their own on track and go, I mean, you sure you wanted to do that? And it's always typical you think, would they have done that if they hadn't been dropped? Would maybe that serve as an extra bit of motivation, or would they have done it anyway and it would have looked extra good? But it's always just amusing how it seems to be as soon as they're let go from somewhere, they then develop into their own. And we've seen that with Paul Aaron definitely this season, but there'll be more on him later. But yeah, it's interesting for sure. And like you say with Hadjar as well, he's one of these drivers who for better or worse, has been forgotten for a lot of his time in the feeder series. He's kind of he's a name you recognise, but it's only this season now that he's kind of coming back to the forefront a bit. And regardless of what you think of his personality and how entertaining that can be at times on track, he's at least for the most part proving that he's at least there to compete. And it's like I shouldn't be forgotten either. And he's seen Maloney and maybe he's thinking, yeah, I can do that as well. And that's an extra bit of motivation maybe. But Saudi Arabia then we couldn't have another normal qualifying session at all because that doesn't seem to be the case this season. Oliver Behrman famously took pole, but wouldn't be able to start from there because he had to go off and replace Carlos Sainz. So amusingly, Kushmaini got pole position, which I think was just a nice bit of karma after the whole Bahrain affair. The sprint race, though, Jesse, I thought was pretty epic. For sure, claiming P1, Halgren P2, Aaron there again in P3, Fittipaldi in a solid P4, Maloney going up 15 places in a sprint race. In Saudi Arabia, where there's going to be quite a few DNFs, which there were, including Martins, who, yeah, rough start for him for 2024. And Crawford again in the top six, kind of very nice early showings from him. It was a very good sprint race, I thought.
Yeah, it was a good sprint race, although I think Saudi still sort of has a bit of a weird taste in my mouth because I would have liked to have seen what Ollie Behrman would have been able to do in that race starting from pole. But regardless, it was relatively unchaotic for an F2 outing in sort of Saudi, but still quite an interesting one. Again, the sort of continuation of Martin's rough start to 24 is a bit gutting, and ultimately, I'm hoping it picks up. Like you've already said, I think we're going to see a recovery from him, but I think it's going to be a bit too little, too late. And I think these opening two rounds for him were possibly a bit of a stumbling block, and he's spending too much of his season now fighting against those. So they've almost been sort of a hindrance to, more so than anything.
Yeah, it's this curious thing with Martins where he looked like he would be the obvious shoe-in for whichever Alpine driver left first, and now he's unnecessarily part of the conversation, even if you took Jack Doohan out of contention for it. So it's a real shame how that's developed for him. But if the sprint race was pretty epic, Jenny, the feature race was on a whole other level for several different reasons, not short of which being Fittipaldi winning his first feature race, Miney finishing in P2 after all of that, and Hauger claiming what was just tremendous third place when he had to battle to the line pretty much for a photo finish with Crawford and Cordeal of all drivers. It's kind of he wakes up every now and again and just does these absolutely blazing performances and then goes back into hibernation for another few weeks. And yes, there's some Antonelli Maloney for sure were also not too far behind, and you had this just really close patch of cars coming over the line, and you just absolutely love that's what we watched Formula Two for. And yeah, even Villagomez getting into the points there, and Martin's having not a bad race. It was kind of feel good race for everyone involved.
Yeah, I thought that I was actually surprised that that was Fittipaldi's first feature race win when it happened. I feel like he's had so many opportunities to get there, just things haven't really gone his way a lot of the
Is
time.
he a bit Formula Two's Lando Norris?
I wouldn't say so.
Not just yet. Okay, continue.
No. Yeah, he always seems to be there or thereabouts, but he just never seems to put it together when it matters, I think. And then I was very, very happy with Vishor's win, just going back to the feature race. I think he's criminally underrated. And I've said this for years. I think the way that he just comes out of nowhere and then surprises everyone with wins that don't always stick, but still wins. And that pole position, which we'll get onto later, but this win as well, I thought was so good to see. And especially since the Trident, they don't seem to have got it as good as the Campos did with these new upgrades for the 24 season. So I think to win in a car that's not that strong is really, really impressive, even if it is just a sprint race. But yeah, Villa Gomez was a massive surprise with getting points. I think if we would have thought that at the start of the season, if anyone would not have points, we probably would have gone with Villa Gomez. So good for him.
I think Thiemo
Yes,
and I are possibly eating humble pie on this one, as I know we were a bit skeptical when he sort of appeared out of very much nowhere, possibly Frecker, relatively low down the Frecker order to sort of appear into F2 all of a sudden. We're sort of going, oh, where's he come from? And interesting. And yeah, I
I think
think
it's Kushmini that's messed us about with that one because we've had humble pie on him, so now we're resistant or reluctant to make that same mistake. But then we're like, how often is this really going to happen? We can
yeah,
probably get away with it this time, right? And it's like, fingers
uh,
crossed.
and sort of bitten with it. The Verschoor point is an interesting one because he always seems to be able to sort of put together a really good race and often comes out of nowhere to win them. I think you and I have said this before, certainly when we sort of did a what's going to happen to the Formula 2 grid episode. Verschoor for me is going to be someone who we're going to see winning in sort of WEC and endurance races in the years to come. I don't think there's going to be an F1 seat for him, but he is going to be a name that we see topping the podium at Le Mans in hypercars. He's going to be someone who we see topping the podium at Spa in hypercars because he is just such a consistent driver that you can rely on him certainly over a long period of time and someone who can put together a really interesting race structure. And that's something that I think WEC will really favour. So great driver, but I think there is a series out there that will suit him even better, and we will see certainly his sort of foremost come through.
Australia, though, we moved down under for the second time in Formula 2's history, and we had, in one half sense, an actual normal qualifying session because Dennis Helger claimed pole position and he kept it. However, Victor Martins crashed out of qualifying and just it's all very sad again, and we're just wondering what the hell he's done in a previous life to deserve all of this bad luck at this point. Um, then, then it gets a bit chaotic as we've kind of, despite having only had one round in Australia the year before, we've kind of already come to expect this chaoticness from Melbourne because I've so many notes for the sprint race and the feature race. I mean, where do we even start? But I mean, Isaac Hadjar won the sprint race on track, but he was later demoted to P6 through a 20-second time penalty due to him causing a collision in the opening meters, which resulted in Marty and Bortoletto crashing out in front of the pit lane, which was truly bizarre to watch at whatever time in the morning it was on the Friday night, Saturday morning at the time. And yeah, even a bit rogue for an F2 bingo card. And before I even move on to the rest of it, was that a bit harsh of a penalty considering it was even technically the first lap, but it wasn't even the first corner. Hadn't even got past the exit to the pits yet.
Was a little bit of a
I,
rough one, I think.
I think there's normally always that leniency with first lap incidences, and I really thought this should have been one because from what I remember of it, it was very much a
Bit of a tag situation, I think, wasn't it? And it was kind of
yeah.
squash, nowhere to go too much. And yeah, he could have maybe gone a slightly different way, but it's kind of reactionary in the moment, and it's easy for us to say this looking back at the highlights and the replays as we're waiting for the mess to be cleared up. With the particularly amusing bit of the driver in the pit lane, I forget who was now just sitting there, and these two cars just compiling across the exit. Like, where the hell am I supposed to go? But
Was it
yeah,
Fittipaldi that
it's
was sat in the pit lane waiting to come out?
think it might have been.
It feels familiar. It feels like a situation that Fittipaldi would end up in. Is just sort of watching a crash happen in front of him and just sort of sailing through the gap behind.
Yeah, it is awkward because we've seen this in kind of inconsistency across all of the formula in a way. I think where first lap it depends on the venue, it depends on the drivers, and I'm not entirely sure what the pattern is. It just seems it's it's fairly unfair on the whole, which is not ideal really, especially as we go to Austria soon, where track limits are going to be the problem left, right, and centre, and that's going to be enough to be dealing with. Never mind any other first lap instant stuff. So that'll be interesting to see how that turns out. Um, but Stanek then inherited the winner's result, and to be fair, he did deserve it. In if there was any driver that was going to inherit it, because he put up a great defensive drive to initially secure P2. Hauger then was in P2, Miney in P3. Um, and Helga taking that eventual P2 with particularly ballsy overtake. I might stretch your memory a bit here, Jesse, on lap 22, or going around turn 9. It was one of these ones where like I didn't know that was doable there, and he just kind of made it happen. I'm just testing you now
Yes.
to see if you can get everything in your
Yeah, hang
mind
on.
there.
Let me go. Let me just bring up. If I bring up the circuit map, I guarantee you'll recall what it is. Australia Grand Prix track. If I have a look at a picture of it and remind myself which one is turn 9, I'm sure it'll come. Oh, yes, because it's the fast left before you heavy
Hmm.
braking for the right of 10, because it was sort of reprofiled, wasn't it?
I
Yes.
snuck it down the inside there, I
Swinging
think, and
one
just
through there is quite bold because it's also a gap that closes very quickly if you're trying to send one to the inside of someone. And it's one of those things that sort of makes you look at it and go, yeah, there is sort of very much in F2 this ability to simply send it and see. And it is a series that also rewards that at the same time. So it was great to see the sort of gumption and ballsiness to make that move. I loved it.
Colapinto, meanwhile, Jenny, he had an interesting race, shall we say, P4 for him, and his engineer definitely getting the comedy award this year for telling Colapinto that if he's faster, he can just go and overtake Hauger and prove that he's faster. It's that nice kind of balance between motivation and or carrot and stick rather there. And Colapinto has proven that he's a fairly decent driver, so I was quite surprised that we had this kind of radio call from him, but we've had this from at least all of the drivers at least once so far in their F2 and F3 careers. But that was quite an amusing thing, I thought.
Yeah, it was a strange one. I think that was their way of saying, you do what you want, I don't want to get involved. But I thought Colapinto's had an amazing season so far. The way that he came into F2, I think, with low-ish expectations, I think it's fair to say. But the way that he's handled certain things, and obviously we'll get on to his sprint win later, but he's really surprised me, and he did in his first F3 year as well. He just seems to be able to get straight into it. He doesn't really need this time of being a rookie, I feel like. So yeah, it was nice to see him have the confidence as well with a teammate that's been in F2, sorry, for 3 years. That's nice
Hmm.
to see.
And it's always great to see another driver from South America that isn't Brazil, because as much as we love Brazil, it always seems to be Brazil and nowhere else. Coming up through the ranks a bit and at least getting into F2 where he is from here, we don't know, but at least you're kind of putting the country on the map a bit there, and we're getting more of that. Because I like the variety. It's fun when you're looking at the start of a new season through F2 and F3, and you don't mind if there's a kind of a left field driver there when you think, oh, we've not had someone from where was it? I think in F3, Jesse, Peru.
Yeah,
You're like, oh,
Peru.
that's good fun. When's the last time we had a Peruvian driver? Let's Google Peruvian motorsport. No idea about any of that. So Colapinto getting Argentina back on there is excellent. Another bizarre thing that we did see though, Jesse, was on lap 10 of the sprint race, Vachor, Aaron, and Antonelli all kind of having very coordinated, bizarre, non-contact incident with one another, and spinning out of the race.
Yeah, just sort of pushing each other a little bit too far to the limits and unsettling cars. I think the new style of the Formula 2 car has some interesting aerodynamics to it. You can certainly hear the aerodynamics of it when they're coming past on circuit, that fantastic whistling noise they make. Um, but there's it's not as bad as Formula One with the sort of dirty air and the wake and wash that comes off of it, but it does result in some very interesting and on the limit sort of battling when you've got cars side by side. And I think this is very much a sort of example of that case of the car's become a little bit unsettled, and you've really got to have your wits about you and sort of drive it very much as a manual car, as you would sort of a Formula Ford car with no downforce. It's yeah, it which is great. It's what you want with the feeder series because it makes a driver prove their ability. And this is an unfortunate incident where Aaron and Antonelli maybe suffered a little bit with that lack of experience. And here, Vershaw's experience won out with a car that would start to get a bit snappy, a bit walkable in corners. He was just able to sort of cling onto it a bit better.
It reminded me a bit of Schumacher and Latifi's incident at Abu Dhabi a couple of years ago, where they kind of spun out together very neatly and went, "How the hell did that happen? Not sure, but we shouldn't do that again. Let's not. Hopefully, no one saw that. We all
Yeah,
saw that."
the perfectly timed
Um,
pirouette in each other's dirty air is the same sort of
hmm,
concept. But I think here in the lower formula, you've probably spent a bit more time recently driving cars without sort of huge levels of downforce. So when all of a sudden you lose the little bit of downforce you do have, you're like, ah, this feels familiar. And you're sort of used to counter steering, you're used to backing off or using the throttle to control it a bit better. And the net result is experience plays out over sort of sheer dumb luck and youth, really.
was a race of recovery and redemption on Sunday for the feature race, though, Jenny, because Hadjar was able to win the race and keep it. Aaron got P2, so nice recovery for him. But on the flip side of that, Bortoletto, bad weekend for him because he was out before lap 8.
Yeah, Hadjar did an amazing job to win this one. I thought that it was such a statement drive from him. He'd had
Mm,
awful luck the whole season so far. And well, you touched on it before. His personality is you either like him or you don't.
yeah,
And it's very much one way or the other. I think how passionate he is, I like seeing it. I don't necessarily agree with how he displays it sometimes, but it's nice to see that because you don't always get it, especially
you can't say he doesn't care.
no, you can't. And it's so nice to see him, when he wins, how happy he is. I like seeing that. And I think he drove so well this race, and it was just it just felt like a statement win. Do you know what I mean?
Hmm. Well, I think
Um,
he's had other strong races this season, but for me, this one has felt like the best one so far, and he's not bettered that since then. Maybe we need to disqualify him from each sprint races, and so he gets that motivation to come into the feature race. I don't know what the methodology there is, but and I wouldn't want to be the one to tell him on team radio. I'd maybe just mute that afterwards. But yeah, he's an interesting driver, and like you say, in the same way that Maloney made that statement early on in the season, but kind of was doing that off the back of what happened pre-season. This is then obviously very reactionary, but it can so easily go the other way if you get a bit of bad luck from the sprint race. You have something you disagree with, and then it just spirals for the rest of the weekend, and you can't really recover. So for him to not let that get to him in a way that was, I guess, somewhat surprising, considering, as you're saying, his personality can be interesting at times. The thing like how he reacts and then how he drives, two very separate things at times. Um, Whereas then in the background, we've got Maloney P3 yet again, just quietly just in the background, another podium, nice points on the board, and very much kind of this championship thing of I don't need to win every race or I don't need to be in P2. I can just collect the podiums where I can. If I'm going to get a win, I'll get a win. But I just want to make sure I want to maximize the points and not do anything silly. So I'd be very intrigued when we do get to the end of the season, the gaps in points between various drivers, regardless of who's won it, to see where they maybe should have pushed a bit harder, where they shouldn't have. And if Hadjar misses out, how much that sprint race would have cost him.
Definitely. I think with obviously the top three at the minute being Aaron and Maloney and him, I think the way that they're all performing is incredible. And we've seen it before where those few points, you don't get much for a sprint race, but they can be so, so, so
Mm.
crucial. And I think that the way that they're all going this year, I do think it'll be by the skin of
Skin of the
the
teeth.
saying. Yeah, that one.
Skin of the teeth as well, Jesse. The Lagomas was P7 in that feature race.
Yeah, sort of another good
Kind of we're on
performance
the
from
skin of our
him.
teeth there, not him, because that's because
Yeah,
of what we've been saying about him.
we're very much sort of risking looking a bit like idiots, or people certainly risking looking exactly like who we are, which is to say people that don't watch Fracka. So we didn't
We
really
don't
know.
have time, Jesse. There's too much racing.
There's too much racing, and I'm doing too much of it. There's yeah, it's he's one of those drivers that I'm just gonna have to be pleasantly surprised by, and I love it when we get talent that just appears in a series and you go, oh, that's excellent. And he doesn't seem to get a lot of the TV time either. So you just see this name moving up the time total. You see a little VIL and just doop, doop, doop. You're like, oh, okay, he's doing well. That's interesting. When he starts cracking into the sort of top seven regularly when it comes to things like qualifying and into the feature races, and he starts getting the television coverage, that's going to be the really interesting bit to see what his racecraft's like, see what he's doing to afford these places. And I, for one, can't wait for that. I'm going to happily sit down and tuck into yet another portion of humble pie, but I think he's proving to be a very exciting driver. And I
You're gonna have
hope
to
that
start running again.
I'm going to have to. There's no way I'm going to be sort of stay race fit and rally fit if I keep eating all this pie. But yeah, there's something about him that's proving to be quite interesting, and I want more of it. And it's going to be good when it comes.
We had a bit of a flip of circumstances for Hadjar, though, from one round to the next, because after Waterloo secured pole position in Imola, Jenny, Hadjar was a big part of a chaotic start yet again in the sprint race, and took himself and about a quarter of the entire field out with him pretty much immediately. That didn't go to plan, really, did it?
Yeah, that was a bizarre one. Really, really,
It's
really
it's it's
bizarre.
almost like he watched his incident in Australia and thought, I can top that somehow.
Yeah, I remember I was doing the report for that one and I was like rewind, rewind, and it was just so many things that went wrong.
Frame by frame, need to figure out what the hell happened here.
Yeah, it all happened so quick. And yeah, I feel like it's these sorts of incidents that could cost Hadjar the points. Like we were saying before, it will come down to silly mistakes like this, but
It's that interesting thing as well of they're rating incidents to a point, but also it's the same driver somewhat instigating them. And you do wonder how he's reflecting and dealing with that when he's trying to recover then either during a weekend, as we'll get to with him as well, because he kind of did what he did in Australia, but then further on in the season as a whole, because like you say, these points he's missing out and how crucial would they be later? And if he does end up losing the championship by a smatter of points, and you can point at all of these races where it's very obvious where they're missing from, how he then decides to recover from that, either with another season F2 next year or wherever else, because it's character building in the best and worst way, because you know that in a way you've only got yourself to blame for these incidences, even though they are kind of by nature racing incidents.
I think what's going to be crucial is we often see Formula 2 come down to the wire. It's been a little while since we've had races that have been, or championships that have been decided a long way in advance. We sort of often get sort of championships that get to Italy and it's decided their penultimate race. Certainly with Formula 3, it always seems to boil down to what happens at Monza. So what we'll see with Hadjar is likely a close race to the finish. And yeah, again, like you said, we're going to see these races where you'll be able to pinpoint where he's lost these points. And unfortunately for him, it's going to be these big incidences where you can sort of go, that's where you lost your points, as opposed to when you look back at sort of more technical seasons in F1, 2, and 3, where you're sort of looking for races where someone came third as opposed to second, that really became the points divider. Incidents like this are going to be the crucial thing that possibly puts a sort of a big stumbling block between him and the title at the end of the year. But at the same time, the rate he's driving, the pressure and drive he's got on himself from himself is going to be a big steer. And I think we're going to see sort of certainly coming after the summer break, a recovered and revived Hadjar. And that's going to be a threat to the rest of the field.
Well, this is where it's going to get interesting this year, I think, because the last three rounds are, if memory serves, Baku, Qatar, and Abu Dhabi. And Abu Dhabi's Abu Dhabi, that it does what it does. But Qatar is entirely new for them. And that could be just be very interesting. We saw what that was like with F1, with the conditions, and okay, they're in lesser cars, but it's still going to be a challenge in some ways. And Baku's just it's never not chaos. So in terms of who gets mixed up in incidents there, even through no fault of their own, how that impacts the championship is going to be fascinating. But one driver who's going to be hoping to stay out of this, and we'll probably talk about it more later, Jesse, because I know you'll want to, is Antonelli, because he had a terrible sprint race in Imola, almost stalled the formation lap, and then immediately dropped the P12 from P6 before they even got to turn one after a subsequent poor starts, and only got as far up the grid as P11 in the end. Whereas Colapinto managed to do what was quite frankly a very smooth move on Aaron to take the win near the end of the race, with Maloney yet again P3, just consistent, and Cordial again kind of coming out of nowhere, nice P4 strong performance, and Taylor Barnard with I think they were still PHM, maybe AI. No, they were
They were
AIX by
AIX
this
by
point,
that
I
point,
think.
yeah. Have they changed
Um,
again or like hallucinating on
no,
that
they are
one?
just no, they've stayed for now. Maybe in
Okay.
a couple of weeks.
Was it another
Um,
team then, maybe?
maybe, or you've seen my paperwork to buy AIX and change it to a different three-letter abbreviation just for shits and giggles.
Well, PIS.
Um, no, not that on those. XYZ. P7 though for him off the back of his Formula E duties to McLaren. It was nice to see because racing you just need so much seat time and as many. You'll take it in whatever car you can get it, but then you've got to learn the transferable skills for it. So it's nice to see him having a very strong performance in a team that, let's face it, Jenny, we weren't expecting too much from them either this season in Formula Two after previous seasons and performances there. So for him to come and get a P7 in sprint race was ideal for him in a lot of ways.
Yeah, I think um we'll touch on it a bit more later, but they seem to have, since they've gone from Charouz, have been putting in a lot more of a rounded effort into the team. And I don't think any of us really expected it with their driver lineup that they've had this year. There was a couple of, they're both quite unknown, but they clearly
Mm.
knew what they was doing because Barnard's impressed me a lot this year, and so has Dirksen.
Oh, definitely. And Dirksen, I mean, you kind of feel bad for Barnard after the sprint race in a way because he's thinking, well, good luck beating that tomorrow in the feature race. I've just put our team on the map for us. And then what does Dirksen go do? He goes and finishes in P3 for a team that technically didn't exist at the start of the season, keeping, of all people, Antonelli at bay, who had to settle for P4. And in the process, Dirksen became the first Paraguayan driver ever on the podium in Formula 2. I mean, what a way to counter your teammate there, Jesse.
Yeah, just an out of the blue performance. But again, it's Formula Two. We love it when those things happen. You get drivers
Hmm.
that sort of show off the metal they're made from. And yeah, it's especially with the current news surrounding Antonelli, as you've written here, the Mercedes Messiah. Love that phrase. Well done for penning that. It's really interesting and it sort of hots things up a bit because you're sort of going Dirksen again sort of fell into the Villa Gomez camp for us of sort of who, why, and we're sort of left
Google.
going, oh, well, actually, no, that makes sense. He's sort of having some decent weekends. He's found his form in F2. Congratulations to him. Serve us yet again another slice of said pie. And yeah, just it was just a competent drive as well. It wasn't something that revolved purely around luck or sort of
It didn't
sneakily
feel like a
barging
Looney
people out
Tunes
the way.
cartoon where he's
No,
running, going, shit. How do I stay here?
it felt like a race podium finish that he had genuinely earned off the back of a good
Hmm.
drive. And you're sort of looking at it going, oh, we're in for one of those
And for the
seasons,
credit
aren't
where it's
we?
due, Antonelli didn't look like he was letting him have it. He was trying actively to get past him. He just couldn't somehow. And
Yeah.
you're
So
just
if
left scratching your head going, how are you not? Again, you're meant to be the Mercedes Messiah. How are you not getting past this naughty boy?
yeah, you're sort of left with sort of the weird idea of guy who no one knows about, Josh Dirksen. But you sort of got him versus the hot new property that's being sort of prioritized over Carlos Sainz. And you're sort of going,
Hmm.
well, surely the Carlos Sainz other option is going to come past him in a minute. And then the race ends and you go, oh, he didn't. Well done to the Paraguayan. Let's move on to the next round. I have no more to say. Congratulations. You're sort of just sort of baffled by the whole thing. And I think in F2, that's really what you want to do because it's one of those things that then sits in people's minds. And sort of when you go to them going, could I have a race seat in your LMP2 car, your Formula E car? They sort of go, what have you done? Oh, shoot, yeah, you were the guy that did X. And then all of a sudden you're like, that was me. And it just
And
sort of
A and
served you
I.
better. Yeah. And yeah, so it's just one of those random things that just sort of makes F2 quite as fun and spicy as it is.
Again, it's almost in the same way that Barnard would have probably been a little bit cheesed off at him being outshone quite so quickly after he's done very well for the team. Hadjar's probably quite annoyed at that as well because he wins the race after the terrible sprint race we just talked about. And keeping Bortoleto at bay, who came very close to stealing it from him towards the end. And it's Dirks who's getting all the attention in P3, and it's very much the summation of that meme of the guy celebrating on the podium and just absolutely losing his mind for it. And he's on the third step of the podium, and first second, just looking at him like, dude, calm down. Like, no, this might be the best thing I ever do. But on the flip side of that, then a bad race for Behrman, for Miney, or Sullivan, Halvin, Maloney. And I mean, again, we love that as much as they don't because it keeps the championship spicy and as much as we love Maloney, for example, it's nice to see him. Not nice to see him, but it's good from a neutral perspective to see him have an off day because then he can't run away, he can't stretch his legs too much. He's kept honest a little bit. And the only other bit of note really from that feature race, and it was once again we had basically unacceptable incidents pits with two different teams involving incorrectly putting on tyres. And I think the last time we had this was Abu Dhabi 22. We didn't. I think we got away with it last season, but I don't. But I think this is. But again, it's kind of thing where you think you should have all had the meeting about this. How is this still happening, and why does it keep happening?
I want to say we had it in a Bahrain, and I can't remember if it was last year or the year before. Or that might have been F3, but they don't have pit stops. I don't know.
It does.
It's
They're
definitely one of
not
those
meant
things
to
that
have pit stops, but yeah, I think
one
you
of those
might just
things
be
that
thinking
always crops
Bahrain and
up
Abu
in.
Dhabi are in the desert, so same place.
Maybe I definitely recall it being a anti-clockwise circuit though. So anyway, it's one of those strange things that it seems to be very much an intrinsically F2 thing that this happens to, and yeah, you'd think that by this point they would have it sorted, but at the same time, it's one of those things that happens so rarely that you don't get the full practice for it. Is there time in a race weekend when you're essentially the series that slots in around Formula One to practice those elements of your race weekend? Do the teams have the budget to do it? Do they have the time and the space? It starts to ask a lot of questions around the rest of the series more so than purely the teams taking part. And I don't know. It's one of those jobs that also you've got to remember that you are not specifically employed as a tire changer. You are some other job within the team. Then you also will be doing the tire change the same as you do with Formula One. So it's not your primary role at the same time. So yeah, it asks a lot of questions, but I think it also requires a lot of important context to go with it. Otherwise, you just sort of dismiss it as being a bit Looney Tunes and just sort of tires all over the gaff, sort of the spinning sort of ball of dust and fury, and then the car emerges on fresh tires, bar one, and it sort of falls over. So yeah, it's
Very Looney Tunes again.
yeah.
On the flip side of that, though, Jenny, qualifying in Monaco, you must have been over the moon initially because any other time this would have been perfect for you because Richard for sure got pole position.
I know. I don't know how this has happened, but even inside of
You're
two, I've
writing a
ended up
strongly
being
worded letter to find out how.
I've been made the resident for sure fan. I don't feel that strongly, but I guess I kind of do. But it was just so perfect, and I love the way that they do that in Monaco, and I really think that it should be a thing because the amount that this happens, where they split the sessions, the amount that it happens, especially in Monza, I'm surprised it's not a thing.
Hmm.
But I just love the way that it plans out. And then you're excited for the whole of quali. It's not like the last 5 minutes. You have to watch the whole thing, which I like.
Yeah,
Constant
it's kind of unless you're a diehard fan, you're not necessarily gonna tune in for the whole shebang. And it's nice when there's an incentive to watch it all aside from just pure love for it. We'll get to for sure in a bit though, because yeah, you're in for a rough
Pick
segment of
me
this
for that
episode,
one.
basically. Yeah. I've written here though, Jesse, that if Victor Martin didn't have bad luck at Monaco, he wouldn't have any luck at all. Sprint race, he was out turn one on lap one, which was even well, he made it less, but he didn't make it even anywhere near as far as the previous year. Which, bearing in mind, he was yeah, it just doesn't go well from there.
Yeah,
Try not to drag this out too much.
it's one of those strange ones for Martins that you're just hoping his season turns around soon because it can't
It
keep
can't get
going
much
on like
worse.
this. Yeah. Like what happens for the poor boy next? Like he has to drive the Alpine F1 car. Surely that's the only step down from this point, is making things worse. But or possibly the endurance car, neither of which actually covered more distance than the safety car at Le Mans this weekend, which is quite a fun fact. But yeah, it's you just feel sorry for Victor Martins at this point in the F2 season and just hope that things pick up because he's not driving badly. Things
He's
just
just got
keep
the
going
worst
wrong.
luck.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm gonna have to go and fix Alpine, which pray for me. Pepe Martin, meanwhile, he did a bit of a Charles Leclerc from yesterday when he DNF from the sprint race. It's interesting how that, well, kind of when that part of the track catches drivers out, because it's not always the case. It's just kind of very here and there. But interesting that happened to him. Unfortunately, it did. So that was him done because he was doing all right at that point. It kind of reinforced what I was saying on our F1 review, Jesse, for Monaco, that as much as you can race a bit more in F2, even at Monaco, it's very much the drivers v the track. And you saw this with Behrman because he was struggling with the car issues in the second half of the race, which ultimately did put him down at the points, but he was able to survive Monaco in some respects there, even if he didn't get the points for it. Um, Whereas you kind of had a bit of an awkward moment at the end there, or getting towards the end, where Maloney was locking up and got tagged by Correa, went out of the race and took poor old Kushmania with him, and we got a 5 lap final shootout, which then proceeded to give us Taylor Barnard, who again took probably Dirkson's challenge of P3 personally and went, right, we're not doing this again. I'm going to win this race. And he did. 5 second leads at Monaco over Bortoleto with Hauger on P3. And again, two drivers that they're not too bad either. So it's not like he was home free easily. He had to really work for that towards the end. And it was really nice to see him kind of bit of a taste of what would come on Sunday's race. But you must have been quite happy for that, Jenny, because if it wasn't going to be Richard Bashaw doing well this weekend, at least you got Taylor Barnard after he was impressing you this season.
Yeah, I think I was just as well, not just him, but the step that the team have made, I think it's just been
Hmm,
incredible. I don't think
that's
any of us,
ridiculous.
yeah, I don't think any of us really expected Chiru slash PHM slash AIX to be where they are because they've had such a tough time of it. And I think, do you know what? Good for them. I like it. And it's nice to be in a season where it's not just Prema and ART with the occasional road in. It's
And
nice
this season,
to,
you wouldn't even know that Prem were involved in the championship, would you? So
yeah, it's a very good point. And I think it's nice to have a little bit of a refresh. And sometimes, you want that for F1. It's never really going to happen. So it's nice that at least you've got a season you can bank on it.
we do like that underdogs tour, and I think the closest we've got to that at the moment, F1, is Haas, just by not being Haas in their usual sense there. But we're not quite at the race win just yet there. Feature race though, Martin's dropped from P2 to P14 on that one, but at least he made it past turn one. So I'm really struggling, but just about finding the silver linings. Um, One of my favourite moments of the entire weekend was Behrman versus Antonelli on lap 22, with Behrman coming out on top with what was just quite frankly just a blind move around the hairpin. It was fantastic to watch, Jesse. You must have enjoyed that tussle as well.
It was, yeah, a proper little ding dong. And again, Jack Crawford proving to be a really, really good little racing driver. But at the same time, if you're going up against a really good racing driver and having a sustained battle around Monaco, you're also pretty good. So this reflects really nicely on Miney as well. And I think neither driver really came out of that looking bad. If you're having a proper scrap and making it work and it's clean around Monaco, yeah,
Just
credit
unfortunate
to
that I
it.
seemed to
Yeah.
forget that they were in Monaco and this might not work.
Yes. Yeah. It sort of unfortunate, but yeah, I think at the same time, if you're having a proper scrap and it goes on for a little while, fair enough. But again, I think Monaco proved itself to be quite a formidable circuit that entire weekend for whichever series you're in.
From a neutrals fan perspective, though, Jenny, there was one more sad bit of the race, which was Butchor having to retire after issues with the car, which was just so not what we wanted after. Like he's got pole, he's almost guaranteed the win at Monaco. He leads for the majority of the race, and then this happens. Did you even bother watching the rest of the race, or did you turn off in anger at that point?
Do you know what? As a neutral, I found this heartbreaking. And I think
Never mind
that
as a fan.
Um, but it's like what you guys were saying. You just want the underdog to do well, and I see him as that. Um,
Mm.
but yeah, and then you had the little thing of him, the video of him on
Oh
the
yeah,
in the
just
pits,
sitting.
and his head in
Yeah,
his hands. It was just, it was hard to watch, and yeah, these things
the,
happen. But
the
I
solace we can
remember
take
thinking,
from that is that it's probably going to become a meme though at some point. So we'll get something good out of it.
yeah, I mean, if that was me, I'd never want to see that again. Um, but do you know, I had a glimmer of hope. I thought maybe he could do a Danny Rick 2018, and then like
Mm.
2 laps later, he just started dropping down. But it was the way that he dropped down. I just thought it
Yeah,
was so
it was.
sad.
You can hear the violins on the Titanic.
Yeah, and then the 5 second penalty as well. It was just like
Oh yeah,
so
just because
mean.
it wasn't bad enough as it was. It's already there.
Yeah, the 5 second
Yeah,
penalty is that point just rearranging the deck chairs on the Titanic, really.
Mm, mm. I'm just kicking while he's down. Um, but I think possibly, definitely at the very least, contender for moment of the season. This is going to be fun to look back on come season's end. Was the absolutely outstanding twist with what was just basically an inspired Monaco worth gamble by Zach O'Sullivan and team as they capitalised on the virtual safety car caused by Duxton Maloney. They pitted with 1 lap to go, having not pitted at all yet, doing very much an Alex Albon from Australia, and getting out ahead of what was at that point presumptive race leader Hadjar, and he stole the win from him in the best possible way, having started the race from P15 at Monaco. And to top it all off, it's his first win in F2, and it's your first win in F2 in Monaco, starting from P15 against a driver that is yeah, he had interesting feelings about it. I think we could say that. Um, that's just you couldn't write it better yourself if you had time to think of something. There, it was just absolutely brilliant, and it's the angriest I've ever seen someone in P2, which is saying something. That Aaron P3 didn't seem to be too fussed about it. He had a nice time. He took the championship lead in process, but the team radio, the watching of the podium, the watching of them getting out of the cars. You could not have a more stark contrast, could you, Jesse, between O'Sullivan and Hadjar?
I think I loved O'Sullivan's strategy. I love the fact they pulled it off. I think I had it on the telly. I was watching on the weekend on that weekend. I remember my sort of dad coming in and sort of going, "Oh, who's winning?" And I go, well, we don't know just yet because O'Sullivan has yet to make his pit stop. And if they pull this off, he could be on for a win here." And dad's like, oh, "Okay." So he's sort of doing the usual sort of dad watching, stood at the
Mm.
back of the room, hands on hips, just sort of trying not to pay attention, and pulls it off. And you're like, oh, that is an absolute blinder. And yeah, maiden F2 victory in Monaco under those circumstances. You look like a bit of a Don. But at the same time, the whole sort of podium, sort of triumvirate really sort of embodies my theory of winning a race, great. Coming second sucks. Coming third is great because second suggests that you could have won. Third, you're like, I
Mm.
made it to the podium, hooray! And winning is obviously winning. So second is almost like the worst point to be on the podium. And Hadjar really sort of nailed it with that one of sort of going, oh god damn it, and but more so and violently Frenchly in this in sort of a reaction. So yeah, it was just such a perfect end to the race. And again, sort of having that little sort of sprint battle through the final laps of sort of hot, ready going tires versus coming out of the pits at Monaco, a very slow, tricky pit exit. So you're coming out with tires that have not been in tire blankets, it's F2, and you've then got to go, oh shoot, he's on my tail, quick, go. And yeah, also there are walls everywhere, don't bin it. It's sort of to not crack under that pressure, I think was a great sort of move from O'Sullivan. And
It was that thing from O'Sullivan that he had nothing to lose and everything to gain there. So why would he be under pressure from it? And contrast to that, you had Hadjar kind of doing what Colapinto did in Australia, but on a much grander scale and going on the radio going, the hell is going on here? Why is he in the lead? And kind of the engineer going, what do you want me to do about it? I'm not in the car. I can't fix this for you. If you want to win, you've kind of got to get past him yourself and kind of, it is what it is. That's racing. I'm not happy about it either, but there's nothing I can do about it. And it just reminded me just of the bit from the first Star Wars film where you're where the trade federation is going, just shoot him or something. Just get him out the way. I deserve this win for myself. And like, that's not how this works.
Or was that episode one? Was you referencing
Hmm.
as that one? Yes, yeah, I've recognized the scene. Yeah, I mean, it's great that we have that sort of final little sort of scrap to the end because it was. I am thinking of the feature race for Imola, literally the race before for F2, where again it was that proper ding dong going to the line. And you're just thinking, I love the fact that we've got a race that happens for the entire period of the race. It's not sort of like a great start,
Hmm.
dull middle, great finish. It's all the way through. And yeah, for a racing fan, F2 is really proving its worth this season. And I think O'Sullivan, worthy race winner.
I think as well, ART played that perfectly, and they were so lucky in the sense of if you make your mandatory stop under the safety car, it doesn't count. And they were, I think it was either three or
It's like
four
6 seconds
seconds off.
or something, wasn't it? Yeah.
They were cut it so short that they was either the win or a disqualification away from that. And I just think that it just shows how much of a gamble it really was.
But again, kind of how worth it was because you're either going to pit and you'll probably come out like low down in the points if you're going to get any points at all. So you might as well risk it for everything because otherwise you're not going to get any points anyway. So sod it. Why not have a go at it? And it's kind of what Formula 2 is all about. It's seeing who can do what under the pressure and when you've got a top team like Prema kind of floundering around trying to figure out what the hell it's doing and what's going wrong, you would love to see the other teams that are not normally there, that or teams that are struggling as well, a bit like ART, where you'd expect a bit more from normally going, right, this might actually we're gonna have to think outside the box a little bit. We could actually do something here and then doing it. And I think in terms of two race winners over a weekend, I think it's probably the most satisfying of the season so far, having one from AIX and then having Zach O'Sullivan in that particular way for a feature race. I don't think, from a neutral perspective, you could have had a better pairing there over that weekend. We'll move on to our winners and spinners section, though, for the season so far. And Jess, I'm going to come to you first. Who has stood out to you so far this season?
For me, it's got to be Gabriele Bortoleto. I think he's had a fairly clean season so far, and I think if things keep boiling away as they are in this very sort of chopping and changing sort of world we're seeing F2 form this year, he could be in with a title shout if things go right for him. Ultimately, though, he's proven to be very exciting to watch on track, an incredibly dynamic driver, fantastic livery on the car, and yeah, just one that you're always sort of captivated by when you see him on track, ready to make overtakes and make some moves. So I've loved what I've seen so far, and I'm excited to see more from him as well. I think is the sort of two-pronged approach.
Jenny, what about yourself?
I think I'd choose Maloney. I think the way that he started the season is just the way that you'd want to do it. Apart from Monaco, that wasn't great.
Well, we all
But
have
I think
one.
yeah, and I think he's actually out of the top three. I do think he's the most well-rounded, and I think he had a bit of a tough season last year, but I think he's come out of it in the best way. And he seems to be so much happier with Sauber than he was with Red Bull. He's
Mm.
away from the pressure that you can have there. I'm really enjoying watching him. I think he's gonna have a bit of a poor share season in the sense that he'll do a couple of wins and then I just think he's got the consistency to win it overall more
You're,
than
you're
I
kind of
think.
looking at him going, how's he won this season? We've watched the whole season and we've seen how he's done. We're like, how the hell is he in the lead? How's he managed this? And like, oh yeah, he has actually done pretty well. You just kind of forget about it because he's just doing such a quiet job of it. And it's kind of like, yep, I'll win here. I'll wait a bit. I'll win here, but I'll be really sneaky the rest of the time and just get all these points and these podiums. But you'll somehow forget about it because I'm just kind of tunneling my way slowly through and you're just not going to see anything.
Yeah, and I think he's got the side right that Hadjar maybe hasn't, in the sense of he's not making those big mistakes. He's just getting the job done.
I think it's very much like you were saying, you can tell the difference between which one of these drivers is in the Sauber Academy and which one's in the Red Bull Academy. And you've got the quiet driver on the left and you've got the screaming driver on the right. I think I know which one's which.
Yeah.
Um, in the spirit of quiet drivers, I've gone for Paul Aron because 5 podiums so far this year, no wins, but I feel like that's definitely going to change at some point this season. It's got to. And it'd be interesting if it doesn't actually, and he wins the championship with no wins, because that will then be the definition of flying nicely under the radar there. And I think after he was cut from Mercedes, the fact that he's doing significantly better than the driver that they want to put in Lewis Hamilton's seat at the team next year is quite amusing for a neutral perspective of how they watch this. And if you're coming into F2 and you're weirdly not a massive fan of F1, you're looking at these drivers going, who's going to go where maybe for next year? And you see Antonelli at the moment, you think, why is he going up there? Look at these drivers, and it's all very very curious, but kind of leads us into our spinach section because we touched on Antonelli a bit more there, Jesse, because you've partly picked him, but you've also picked the rest of the team.
I think there's a fundamental flaw with what Premier have gone into this season doing, and it's tricky to try and pull apart whether this is because of the drivers or if it's because of the team or the way they're running the car. There's something that just hasn't gelled. And I don't think it's specifically the drivers, because you look at what Behrman is able to do at his general talent level. That to me suggests that this is something that transcends simply beyond the fact that the two of them can't drive, because we know Behrman can, and arguably we know Antonelli can to a certain extent. We just haven't seen potentially the upper limits of it, or I'd like to think we haven't seen the upper limits of it yet. So this is more of a sort of a prod towards the team to try and get more from them. But I don't know how. It's a spec series. They're not developing the car. They can't bring new parts to the car. And you're sort of left looking at it going, what are you doing wrong? It's a fairly simple guidebook. How have you not followed it correctly? So I'm sort of a little let down by them and want to see more. Potentially, as an outfit, they're a bit distracted by starting up an IndyCar, but that doesn't seem to have impacted them too badly in Formula 3. So yeah, it's an odd one.
I want to get your thoughts on this one, Jenny, because Antonelli's this curious debate that keeps going on and on and on. And if he wasn't a Mercedes, well, no, even if he was a Mercedes driver, but he just wasn't having this hype made around him. He was just another junior that they'd signed, and they weren't necessarily talking about him replacing Lewis next year. We probably wouldn't be on his case quite so much. But because he's got all this expectation, because the journalists and fans and everyone have such expectations of him, it's hard not to criticize, even though it's not necessarily always that fair. But it's trying to find that balance of how much criticism can we give him, considering what he's meant to be doing versus what he's doing, how much of that you put on the team and the car, and how much you put on the driver. So, what are your thoughts on all of that? It's a weird line to try and walk to try and get the best of both.
I think I was very skeptical in the first few rounds and thinking, okay, the media are bigging him up to be the next big thing, and he could go to Mercedes alongside Russell and take Hamilton's seat when he's just come from Frecker, but he's not performing in F2.
Mm.
But I think rather than comparing him to the rest of the field, I've started looking at him against Behrman instead. And I think everything that Jesse said is right, because I don't think that Behrman or Antonelli are wherever they are in the standings. I don't think that reflects them low down. I don't
Yeah.
think that reflects them at all. I think they're a lot better quality than a lot of the drivers on the grid, but I just don't think the car's necessarily letting them show it.
It's
But
going to be an interesting one to watch as the season unfolds, because you're thinking if he's all but guaranteed to get into that F1 seat, but then do you potentially have the same problem next year if Mercedes can't sort out their woes? And do you think you comparing it to George, but then also then is it the car? Is it then 26 before we can judge him properly? And if it is, why not keep him in F2 for another year in some respects so we can try and see what's going on there? It's this very curious thing of we've kind of got a Schrodinger's driver and we're not sure if he's good or bad because we can't quite open the box yet because the crowbar's not working.
I think the way that I see it is putting him into an F1 seat this year. I can't see it working. I think they're more likely to ruin his career by putting him in too early rather than waiting. Because I don't think he's shown near enough as much as an F1 driver should have by now.
Hmm.
So it's a tough one, but I do
I
think
think that's
most
what
of it
saves
is
Behrman in
praise.
some regards because whilst he's having a stonker of a bad F2 season, when he got into the F1 car, he was able to deliver immediately and get points on the board there. And you can tell that, okay, we've got that. So maybe we need Lewis or George to have a bit of an off day and they can't get into the car for whatever reason. And if Antonelli then is able to do, again, not necessarily needs to get points, but it just shows that he can do something with that car. Maybe that would alleviate some of the pressure from him. But it's kind of this thing where that'd be a very F2 thing to happen, but I don't know if that happens in F1.
Yeah.
As for myself, though, I've gone for Enzo Fittipaldi because despite him winning in Saudi Arabia, it was his first feature race win in Formula 2. And as for someone who's in his third full season, that seems a little bit odd. And he's a solid enough driver, but he seems to be missing something. And the other results this year show that. And I think he's a driver that needs a bit of a vast improvement for the rest of the season. And it seems harsh, but I'm known for being harsh, that his name's maybe carrying him further than it would if it wasn't there at the moment. I'd be curious to see if he got a third season, if he was just Enzo, something else. Is again another one of these drivers, like you're saying earlier, just maybe he'd be better suited to a different category. I, I, as much as fun as it would be to have Fittipaldi in F1 again, I think there's a reason that we see very little success rates when it comes to fathers and sons at the moment racing in F1. The kind of only two successful outings of that we've had have been Rosberg's and the Verstappen's, and even the first Verstappen wasn't really that successful. It was more just here's what not to do, Max. Don't do what I did. Everyone else who tries it kind of seems to like it's a nice idea, but the execution hasn't quite got there yet. And I fear that Enzo is another one in that list.
Yeah, I think Enzo's an interesting one. You see these sort of flashes of talent, but off maybe you're right with the name, but at the same time, I'm only saying that because I was about to say maybe he's just never simply had the right car underneath him. So I'm sort of in two minds over it. And I think it'd be nice to see him in a top team. It'd be nice to see him get an FP1 drive. I think for me, that'll be the real decider. I don't think we've seen him do an FP1 drive before.
I don't think so, no.
No. So would be an interesting sort of balance point to see how he does in a car against some of the other F2 drivers of the current crop and see what times he's able to put out, see how at home he is. Obviously, FP1 drives aren't the be all and end all of it, but it'd be just interesting to see. Hell, the rookie test session at the end of Abu Dhabi would be a great time to sort of get a proper footing as to what he's up to. He could be one of those drivers that sort of doesn't sparkle in F2, but then comes alive in F1, the same as we've sort of seen as drivers move up from F3 to F2 and sometimes F2 to F1. It might just be a case of that, but at the same time, maybe we're seeing peak Fittipaldi. Who knows?
I hear what you're saying, and I'll go to Jenny for one more bit here because I want to get your thoughts on this because sprint races in F1 for me, I'm not there for them. However, what would make me there for them is if you put the reserve drivers or some of the F2 drivers that are associated with the teams in the cars instead. So would you be interested to see a few of them, including Fittipaldi, in that sort of a setting, and then we can really sort them out to see if they've got what it takes?
Yeah, I think what they've been put in for, I don't think the sprint races, I don't think that they're delivering at all. So it'd be, like you said, it'd be a good comparison for them, especially when we've got people like Antonelli and Behrman, because Kramer aren't necessarily performing, it's hard to tell where they are. So that would
Mhm.
actually be a very good idea.
Well, we'll have to continue that petition then, Jesse. But I'm going to keep it with you for a second longer, Jenny, because are there any other drivers that are, are worth a mention, at least, for good or for bad, for you for so far this season?
I've gone for Marty just because I thought the way that he started the season was unreal. I thought the
Hmm.
time that he had in Bahrain, double podium, I thought that was so impressive. And then he just seems to, I don't know whether he's dropped off a little bit. I'd like to think he hasn't, but a lot of it has been a lot of bad luck. So I'd be very interested to see his next half. because I genuinely think there's so much pace there, and he showed it when Hadjar didn't.
Yeah,
I
yeah,
think he can
it's
be one of the ones that will soar up the championships and standings in the end.
yeah, definitely. I think it's his home race, I think, this weekend coming at time of recording. So if he can have a strong performance there, that's going to bolster his confidence a lot, especially against Hadjar if he can't translate that for whatever reason. I mean, Hadjar seems to have 50% of a good weekend at the best of times. He's not been able to nail the entire weekend so far. So if Marty can just quietly go about his business and kind of imitate Maloney or Aaron in that way, that'd be quite good for him. And he also is quite an emotional driver. It feels like when you hear him on the team radio when it goes well and when it goes badly. But he doesn't seem to be in the kind of he's kind of an octave lower. It feels like than Hadjar, so doesn't quite burst your eardrums every time he comes on the radio for something like this. So that's going to be quite a fun inter-team battle to watch. I think. Jesse, who you got on your list of people to give a mention, or is there no one else that's impressed you or unimpressed you?
We've mentioned him a bit already on this podcast, and his performance thus far has rather tickled my pickle, and I'd like it to happen again. Villa Gomez. I'd like to see that next step up as the season develops. I'd like to see a bit of that driver development just sort of starting to creep in, just sort of going, okay, I understand what the cars are about, I understand how the people around me are driving on the field. I'm going to start sort of utilizing this and making moves here and waiting for this person to drive the way I'm expecting them to. The little things that really start to solidify a driver as being a true professional as opposed to someone that just goes out there and has a great time on track. That's for me what I'm looking for to start differentiating Villa Gomez as like the next step. And this is going to be the sort of key element is sort of seeing that development, that step up. We know that he's obviously gotten to grips with the car. And while his championship position is a relatively paltry 22nd at the moment, I think we're going to start seeing that climbing up. And yeah, some sprint finishes maybe a bit higher up, maybe cracking into the top 10 in the sprints, and how even a sort of a nice finish in the feature wouldn't go amiss here or there.
Again, I think that's where qualifying comes in handy there. He just needs to get as high as being able to attain reverse pole and kind of get in that territory. So it doesn't need to be like perfect for qualifying. It just needs to get near that space where it's decent enough for the feature race where there's a possibility of points, but then he can capitalize on the sprint race and maybe take it from there and just be a bit more strategic about it and look at his history. Which tracks are we going to that he's been to that he knows he can maybe risk a bit more on than others, and where is he going to be just perhaps his normal self in the harsh way that I'll say that in terms of he's not having his flash in the pan moments, so he can just get the experience under his belt. And this is a driver that he's already exceeded our expectations in a lot of ways, so he should probably be back next season. So he's kind of got this. He's got less pressure on him than other drivers do, so he can focus more on just going into the weekend. Here's what I want to try and achieve here, but that's going to be very different to what I want to achieve here, and we'll see how it goes. And maybe, like you say, he makes you a happy man. I'm not going to say the phrase because I don't want to say that about you or in any context. So, but hopefully, makes you happy come season end.
You do not wish
I've
for someone
gone
to tickle my
for.
pickle. Is that what you're saying?
I don't wish to say that sentence involving you. No. Um, look, I want you to be happy, Jesse. I just don't need it graphic. I've gone for Franco Colapinto though, because as you mentioned earlier, Jenny, he has had a pretty decent season considering what were the expectations for him as well in some regards. He won the sprint race in Imola. He's had some very decent other results, and he's having a pretty solid rookie season. So it's nice to see. And like I said earlier, it's good that we're getting someone from South America who isn't Brazilian for a change. And we've had kind of been spoiled in that way this year with Dirksen and with Colapinto. So it's nice to see, and we want to get that back on the map. It's one of those weird things in Formula One. We've got South America ticked off as a continent that we go to because we go to Brazil, but we don't really go anywhere else. And I'm not saying that this is going to be the gateway to go to racing back in Argentina or somewhere else down there, but it would be nice if that's the start of something just to switch things up a bit, or at least get some more drivers from that region of the world because you can't say there aren't any there. It's just probably they're not getting the opportunity. So I'm hoping this opens up some doorways and we get to see some more flags on the grid next season, maybe in the lower formulas. Driver standings, though, we've got an interesting time of it because we've got Aaron out front at the moment at 80 points, Hadjar on 78, and Maloney with 69 points there. And interestingly, every driver has scored points this season, which does show you how close the competition is because I'm pretty sure we've had a couple of seasons where maybe by the end of the season they've all scored a point, but I don't recall us having every driver by this point in the season having scored points. And I think teams like AIX have very much helped in that respect. We've finally figured out what we're doing here. We're getting podiums and wins and points, even just points by themselves. So I love that the competition is that close that no one is going to be subjected to, well, you didn't score any points this year. You should definitely go away. It's going to be much more difficult to have for us, and we're going to have to be extra brutal by the end of this year, Jesse.
It's going to be a really tricky one, and graphically it looks fantastic. Like looking at sort of the chart of sort of championship positions for the drivers, both sort of in position wise and when it comes to their points, it is all over the place, and there are so many tight clusters of drivers around groups of points that it's going to be a really fun one to keep an eye on as the year goes by. And like you've got to bear in mind that Maloney sort of came into this championship, was holding on to things until Imola, and then dropped two places just off Monaco alone. But then you look at other drivers, you look at O'Sullivan, that result in Monaco was enough to take him from 15th overall up to 7th. And bearing in mind, he started the championship in 5th and then sort of tailed away and then came back again. Like, it's all still very much to play for. And we're only, 5 races into it? So, yeah, tremendously exciting times.
If we'd told you, though, Jenny, at the start of the season that come the end of Monaco, Campos would be leading the constructors' standings with 104 points ahead of High Tech and MP Motorsport, would you have believed us?
Probably not. I think
Understandable.
that it's so. I do think that it's amazing, though, that, like I said before, you're not looking at F2 anymore as a Prema ART thing. And Campos as well, the way that they've turned everything around when you think that they're normally have been, and High Tech as well, they've normally been back markers to midfield. They've never really won to that extent, apart from obviously Boschong a little bit at times last year. But to see them winning it on merit as well, and this far into the season, it's just a bit of a surprise, isn't it?
Yeah, it's like I was alluding to earlier. If Maloney wins the championship, we're going, what's this season? I'm not entirely sure how he's done that. And I feel that way about Campos right now. Like, I've been watching the races, but I'm not entirely sure how they're leading the constructors' standings. I need to go back and reread all of the results to figure out how they've managed to do that. But it's really nice to see, and it's bizarre, like you say, that the top teams that you're expecting to be the top teams, they're not in the top 3 at all. And again, from a neutral perspective, that's exactly what you want, and you absolutely love it. So I'm all there for it. Before we wrap, though, are there any other points that either of you two would like to make about the F2 season so far, or any predictions that you want to make about the rest of the season?
I think drivers' market I'll leave well alone for the moment because that's very speculative. I think I keep hearing all the rumours that Behrman is pretty much signed for Haas. They're just waiting for the ideal moment to announce it. I think Antonelli, despite wiser options, is possibly already in that Mercedes seat, given what Toto Wolff keeps saying about, oh, we're not signing Carlos Sainz, unless they've done some ridiculous deal with Esteban Ocon for 1 year and you're gone. I can't see anything else happening with that Mercedes seat, bar it going to Antonelli, regardless of his performance. So look, I don't want to speculate on that side of things too much. I think I'm going to stick with what I said in my winner section and Bortoletto possibly for a late season dash for the title that comes out on top.
What about you, Jenny? Any bold predictions you want to make?
No, I've very much given up with predictions after Martin and Behrman this year.
I'll put it another way then. Are there any drivers you'd like to curse? Seeing as you appear to have done that with those two.
Ooh.
That wasn't for you necessarily, Jesse. I'm just more going off Jenny's track record here of having succeeded so far.
No, I think it's best that I stay quiet.
Cordeal, go on. Let's see what happens if his championship gets worse.
Yeah, but knowing you've probably made him a championship contender now, where it could be a double negative curse.
Yeah, but then how exciting is it going to be when he comes from 17th to win the title?
Because you know what it would do, Jesse? It would tickle my pickle.
It would tickle your pickle, and that is a perfect point to end on.
that is all we've got time for on this episode. Do come back soon, though, and we'll have more F1 content. And be sure to keep your eyes peeled later in the year for more feeder series content. I think F1 Academy's up next, probably after
Spain.
sometime after Spain.
I think it's after
we
Spain
need to
according to
figure
our
that
big
out.
list.
That season is ridiculously spread out. It's silly. But make sure you've got notifications turned on and that you're subscribed and that you like this and all that good stuff. In the meantime, like Jenny, if people want to see more of you, where can they find you for other F1, F2, motorsport generally? Where can we find you?
InsideF2.com.
.com is
Jenny
important.
Craig.
We'll put that in the description. Jesse, where can people find you?
Instagram, Twitter, and TikTok is at Jesse on Cars. You can find me writing for Classic Car Weekly. Next issue will probably be coming out. Will be out on shop shelves the day I release this. Hopefully, I'll try and edit this one. I'm in the office tomorrow. So pick it up, give it a read. I can't remember what's in this one.
Classic Cars, I imagine.
Classic Cars, interesting stuff. Yeah. All I'm really thinking about at the moment is the fact that we do have a new video coming out as well, following Ellie May and I on our adventures in the world of classic rallying and actually doing motorsport for a motorsport podcast. So that's all still to come. So make sure you've also liked, commented, subscribed to the podcast channel, because that'll all be up there. And yeah, make sure you stay abreast of all things we're up to too. Thiemo, what about you?
Yeah, as for myself, this time around I'm going to be plugging Is It Fast, because I have the start of a little project that I've been working on for a couple of months now. So I've got an article out on Rally Jamil and all you need to know about that. And then over the next 2 weeks, we've got some interviews with some of the drivers from that who are from all over the world with a bunch of different backgrounds to keep it very interesting. The rally is basically the only thing they have in common. So it's good fun to do go and check all of that out. That, however, is it for this episode, as I said. So thank you very much for listening, and we'll be back very soon.